Good morning and welcome. YCCI Cultural Ambassador Community Health Watch. And our subject today is Equitable Breakthroughs in Medicine with EQB Med. And I and Reverend Clayton, pastor of St. Stephen's and pastor of Walters Memorial, are your hosts. And our guests today are Ms. Tisha Johnson Harris, Senior Advisor of EQB Med, former Deputy Director and Chief Clinical Research Strategist and Development Officer of Yale Center for Clinical Investigation, Bishop Dennis Proctor, a African Methodist Episcopal Zion Conference of, and now working with the Conference of National Black Churches. And joining us also will be the Reverend Dr. Darrell Blue, pastor of Little Rock AME Zion Church in Charlotte, North Carolina, also a cultural ambassador, and the Reverend Eldrin Morrison, the pastor of Star Temple, Shaw Temple, AME Zion Church in Smyrna, Georgia. Amen. Amen. Oh, we're so glad to have you. We're gonna start off with with Tisha. Tisha, can you just give us an idea or provide us with an overview of the EQB Med equitable breakthroughs in medicine?
Yeah, happy to. And thank you so much for having me and talking about EQB Med this morning. Um, EQB Med is a partnership that was launched just over 2 years ago, really aimed at ensuring equitable access to clinical trials by communities of color, rural communities, communities that have really been left out of the clinical trials and discovery process. And it's co-led by Marcella Nunez-Smith, who's at Yale School of Medicine, Dr. Elizabeth O'Feely, who's with the Research Centers and Minority Institutions out of Morehouse's Coordinating Center, Dr. Priscilla Paymu from the Morehouse School of Medicine, and Dr. Peter Emby, who is at Vanderbilt Medical Center. And so we together make up the network partner team and the coordinating partner team. And it's really this learning phase of EQB Med has been about bringing sites that have not previously been as engaged in clinical trials together with the mentorship that they need to expand their clinical trials maturity journey, and then pairing them not only with sort of the operational partners that you might need to conduct clinical trials that are overseen by the FDA, and so quality and compliance with data and other things become really important. But equally or even more important are partnerships with the community, making sure that we have individuals who are trusted in the community and by the community to help us really set priorities, to address mis and disinformation, and to make sure that we're adequately thinking about what are the true barriers that keep populations from participating in clinical research. And so it's been a great pleasure to partner with all of you in this journey and to actually be nearing the end of the learning phase and looking forward to, launching the next phase. So I'll stop there. As you know, I can talk about this all day long. So, but I'll give others a chance to weigh in.
Well, before we go to our other guests, can you tell us how many sites and where those sites might be, and how is this EQB Med funded?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the grant was funded. Our initial grant was funded by the Pharmaceutical Manufacturers of America, or pharma. Really excited about that. Pharma actually had conversations with thousands of individuals and stakeholders to come up with what is the EQB Med process. Then they had a competitive grant process where we actually had to apply and be judged to be selected as the best to carry out this mission in partnership with pharma. And they've been on this journey with us ever since, and it's been phenomenal to have their support and help. And then we have 10 sites in this learning phase, and we were charged with activating 10 sites within the Southeast. So we have sites in North Carolina, sorry, in the Southeast, and sites in North Carolina, sites in Florence, South Carolina, several sites in Georgia, Texas, Tennessee, now Alabama. Let me see where I'm forgetting here. But really just, North Carolina sweeping over to the Texas area. And so we're really, excited that we've really spanned the gamut of sites that are more urban based in Atlanta. And then we have very rural sites like Alice, Texas. So really just entire, sort of hitting all of the geographic areas within that region.
All right. Yeah, I just got to let you know that we're listening to WNHH 103.5 community radio out of New Haven. And I know Reverend Clayton has some questions he wanted just to say right now. So we're going to turn it over to him.
Good morning, everyone, again. And Tisha, I do have a question for you. Why is diversity in clinical research why is diversity and clinical research participation so important for scientific and medical advancement?
Well, it's key right now when you think about the U.S. population. We are a very diverse population, and even globally. But when you look at the participation in clinical trials and the data that's presented to the FDA by pharmaceutical companies, device companies that are seeking approval, the majority of the participants are still Caucasian. And while we're definitely more alike than we are different, there are important differences, the way that we might metabolize a drug or the side effect profile might differ just based on slight genetic variations, or also thinking about things like, food or diet or, drug interactions. And so it's very important to have a very broad and diverse participation in clinical trials. And so for far too long, clinical trials have not been representative, not only, thinking about race and ethnicity, but it wasn't too long ago where we had a real gender disbalance in research as well, where the great majority of drugs that initially were approved were essentially white men. And so really not even understanding the variation by sex or by age in children. And so it's just important to have data on not just race and ethnicity, gender, age, all of those things are very important to really understand truly the medicines that we're going to be taking and to have that data available prior to drug approval. And so it's just critical to have all populations participating in clinical research.
And before we move on, I need to just ask this question. Why did EQB Med engage community partners to support this goal?
Yeah, um, I'm sure you know better than I do. I could turn that question back to you and you can answer it for me, because it's based on a lot of the work that we did together at Yale, which was, phenomenal. What we have found is when you're out in the community and you're trying to talk to individuals who have been marginalized or have trust issues or really are receiving a lot of misinformation, you have to meet them where they are. And meeting them where they are, I think, is just a speciality of community partners who are already trusted in the community. And so in a way, you enable a conversation to happen by having that direct partnership with those who are already trusted. We have a leg up. We're able to get in the door. It's not about convincing someone day one that they should be a part of a clinical trial or sign an informed consent, but have them be open to the conversation so that if the opportunity ever arises for clinical trials participation, or that it becomes an option within care because they've been diagnosed with, cancer or heart disease, that just being open to the conversation is something that community partners are able to do in a really unique way. They're able to break down those trust barriers. And then the other side, I think, of that community partnership, which is just so critical, is by partnering with you, you make us better every day in the research community. You're helping us think about really from a clinical trial perspective, how do we truly make trials accessible? How do we make sure that we're not overburdening a participant in clinical trials? And so you keep us focused on what are the priorities of those who ultimately are going to be taking these new medicines or having these new devices be implanted for health improvement. And you keep us focused on that ball. And so these community partnerships, the community partnerships that we've have enjoyed with all of you have just been critical to making these programs better and making us all accountable to make sure that we're focused on health impact and the impact of improving patients' lives on a daily basis.
Reverend
That's
Clayton, could I add to that what Tisha just said? I think it's very important for us to remember and to know, first of all, that the family is all together again. It's good to see everybody. But I'm grateful to EQB Med for bringing all of us together before there was an agenda that was somehow created and we were brought to the table afterwards. But we were on the ground floor in helping to shape what the agenda would be, where we would go, how far and how fast this organization would grow, and I'm certainly grateful for that.
I don't think you were critical to our application. So many of your thoughts and ideas and experiences went into this application with us. And so it's truly been a partner journey. And like I said, you make us better every day. So all of the ideas that you helped us to assemble for this grant and then carry out in the implementation phase have just been critical to the success that we're enjoying right now as we begin to think about launching the next phase.
And I think Reverend Morrison makes a good point about the cultural ambassadors and the work that we've been doing for the past 15 years. And I think Reverend Morrison, I mean, if I can just say this, we had looked at as cultural ambassadors how some medicines work with some groups and not with others. And part of the reason is that we were not participants in those particular studies. But I think you also mentioned something about how the disparity in the South. I think we had a discussion about how some people had to leave the area to get the medical care that they needed. And can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a country girl. I'm a country girl at heart, and growing up in rural South Carolina, you just don't have access to care in the same way as if you're right downtown in Atlanta, Georgia, and you're steps away from world-class treatments and hospitals that have the most cutting-edge facilities. And so when you think about areas, especially rural areas or areas that are further away, what are the things that you need to do to make sure that those individuals are included or have an opportunity to participate in clinical trials? It's not just about saying, here's the center down the street or the doctor down the road, and they need some dollars and they need to be offered a clinical trial opportunity. They have to have an infrastructure. The people in the community have to have the trust to even go to that facility. So how do you really expand all of those things? And I think through EQB Med, what we've been able to do is take a site like in Florence, South Carolina, where Florence is essentially about a 2.5 to 3 hour, depending on traffic, drive from Charleston. Charleston is where everyone is known to have the most advanced medical center in South Carolina. So how do we make it so that if you want to participate in a clinical trial, you don't have to drive past the facility in Florence or Orangeburg or one of the other facilities of the Medical University of South Carolina? How can we make sure that Florence is equipped and able to run clinical trials, that they not only have the knowledge, but they have those critical partnerships with communities so the people in those very rural areas trust that they can go there and trust that clinical trials are an opportunity for them to help advance medicine and science, as well as potentially advance their own care and treatment as clinical trials might be an option to care. And that won't happen without those community partnerships, because when you take someone who lives in one of those areas, they might not have had access to correct information or to information at all. We, sort of make the assumption that everyone's sort of thinking about all of the misinformation or disinformation or even, past harms that have come from research. But the reality is they literally just might not know what it means to participate or that the opportunity exists. And so a lot of what we've been able to do in this partnership with the community partners, especially, is just make sure the information is available. And that's a huge part of the barrier, is just making sure that everyone, regardless to race, to ethnicity, to where they live, that they have access to information and they have all of the information they need to make an informed decision.
Thank you. And before I have a question or two for Bishop Proctor before we move to Reverend Blue. Bishop Proctor, you had, I think the hesitancy that we talk about in terms of how we engage people, and I think you told the story about Tuskegee, and when you went on the campus, can you tell us about that?
Thank you very much. Yes, I lived in Montgomery for 4 years. We're talking about southern sites, and Wilmington, North Carolina for 8 years. And so we had an opportunity to really see what the resistance was to not only clinical trials, but to also the terminology. When you hear trial, we had a long conversation and interaction about a word probation in our church. We say, well, you're a probationary member until, well, probation means something totally different in two different communities, in the white community and the Black community. They were all different. So I was able to bring to this mix a history of working with people really on the ground and in the fields as it relates to things such as clinical trials, where immediately there was hesitation. And so even now, I've come to see that even though people will give you a hearing, they will listen to what you have to say, they're not eager to run and get in line for the trial because of that preconceived notion. And so you cultural ambassadors deserve a large round of applause, because this is not a one and done kind of interaction. It has to be continuous. We have to bring a number of persons in. They have to see us as involved in the process as the Vanderbilts, the Yales, the Morehouses. They have to see those community partners and institutions such as the church that show that these are legit, and it benefits not only our community, but our total society.
Bishop, did you tell us something about when you walked on the campus of Tuskegee, there were some monuments and...
Oh, yes. On Tuskegee's campus, of which I visited innumerable times, Tuskegee campus has little placards and little stations of what happened at this spot on the campus through the years. And of course, everyone knows that Dr. George Washington Carver made his international name while serving as a professor at Tuskegee Institute, which we used to call it, now it's Tuskegee University. But all throughout that campus, and I would assume you had somewhere near to 500 different markers, as we see in states, as you go in various states and you see the state-sponsored marker that said this happened at this spot. Well, Tuskegee has that throughout, and especially when you go over to the med school at Tuskegee and the veterinary sciences school at Tuskegee, you just see how many things were done and why people had such hesitancy. Going back to the Tuskegee experiment, all of this is still very real. Many of us, I'm a New Yorker by birth and breeding, so a lot of this was just history book reading for me until I went and lived in the area and understood better what the feelings were and how we needed to gain a kind of a respect and a sense of accountability to the people that we're working with.
All right. Reverend Blue, when we talk about faith-based leaders uh, and their influence in communities and involvement and awareness of clinical trials, I just wanted to highlight the fact that you did something on Saturday that was phenomenal with your church, where you brought medicine right to the church, so that in this prostate study, you were able to bring the researchers there to do the test. And I think that's just phenomenal. You want to tell us about that?
Yes, we partnered with Finn, and that's dealing with prostate health. And we were able to bring, as you said, our researchers right to the church. The men were able to be tested right on site. We had over 50 men that were screened, and were able to, they will be able to get their results within this coming week. And not only get the results, but also to be educated. They were provided resources right on the spot, and then also finished up with connecting them with other websites and other physicians who were helping them to understand the numbers. Once they received the information, they would understand what they're actually looking at. And then the last part was, once you receive the information, next steps. What do I do with it? So there was follow-up. So it was a beautiful process. We had a good group of men out there. And as we know with our cultural ambassadors, one of the main things is getting out information so that people understand what they're a part of, and to help them to trust the source and point them in the right direction.
Dr. Blue, I have a question for you. That seems like a phenomenal event that you had with the brothers. How were they tested?
So it was a blood test. So they went back in and just quick draw blood, and then that was it. So I did it myself, and so it was easy, straightforward. And as I said earlier, before anyone went to the back to just have that one tube of blood taken, they were informed what was going to happen, why it was needed, and then next steps once it took place, what information you will receive, who you needed to call. And then the beautiful thing with Finn is not only does your physician get the information, but they come up with a follow-up. And so they help you to say, if you're not getting the results from your doctor, then we're going to help you to connect you to the right people. So there was that wraparound care.
Mhm. Reverend Blue and Reverend Morrison, let me just ask a question about the training in Florence, South Carolina, and then in Charlotte, and you guys participated as cultural ambassadors in this EQB Med training, which how does that parlay into what you're doing, and what do you think EQMed can do in terms of its outreach to marginalized communities?
Well, I think as I've heard in so many answers, it helps to keep us informed. As we go out as trusted voices in our communities, we actually need to know what the latest research is, and also remind people of why clinical trials are so important and why we need our communities to be represented in these trials. So being part of these learning sessions help to emphasize the importance of why we continue to be a part of this program, and why we need to get our churches and communities involved in the program. So I think these sessions are vital, because if we don't have our communities involved, then our communities are not represented in the latest research that is available. We can have personalized medicine when we have our communities represented and a part of these clinical trials. So I think it's important that we're there so we get the information so we can take it back to our communities.
I certainly agree with everything Dr. Blue has said, and others. Being a part of these sessions, as he just said, it connects us with our communities. for me, South Carolina has a special place in my heart. My family's from there. We have a small farm that's still there in Lancaster. And to know and to be sitting in these sessions with EQB Med, I'm going through the list of persons that I personally know or have known who could have benefited or who can benefit right now from some of the things that the clinicians are talking about and some of the programs and trials that are available. I remember sitting in one session. I believe we were we were in Florence. And I started texting my cousins saying, you need to find this website, look at the trials that are offered, see if you can connect to them. We were in Charlotte in a training there. We toured the cancer center there. My grandmother is in Charlotte dealing with cancer herself. So for me to be able to have that conversation with her on what I had just seen before I got back to Atlanta, what I just saw in Charlotte, and to let her know some things that are available. These are the kind of things that we need to be able to do on a larger scale. And I believe we are trusted voices. Our family, our parishioners, our community, when we speak, they listen. And I just think it was just so fortunate for us, part of those sessions, particularly in the South, with EQB Med.
Yeah.
And Terry, if I may piggyback on what Dr. Morrison has just said, it's one thing to have information. It's another thing to move from information to implementation. And I think that is what EBQ Med assists us in doing, and that is to bring the information. Everybody's agreeing, yes, we 100%, but how do we get to the site? How do we allow the site, as Blue said, to come into our churches, into our spaces, to make sure people can come where they're comfortable and they don't feel as if they're outsiders? So that is so very important. And I think this is how we move from where we are to where we want to go. He said something else that reminded me when I was pastoring in Wilmington. I invited the group in the area that had men who were living with AIDS to the church. And they came in on Sunday afternoon. Of course, it was not without some controversy because most of them at that time were not necessarily from our community, but they were Caucasians and Asians. But the information was such that the entire congregation changed their attitude once we had a chance to sit down, have a little meal, a little coffee with everyone, and have an honest discussion about what is necessary and what those of us who are leaders in the community ought to do in order to desensitize stigmas and to make people feel real comfortable at home coming in to take advantage of situations or investigations that they would not have done normally. I mean, it was a phenomenal time.
Yeah, I think I have a question I want to follow up with you, Bishop, but I want to say that I think the whole part about information is so important. It's like, for example, when our people find out about these equitable breakthroughs, it's like it's too late. I mean, you're in stage 3, stage 4. So, I mean, having trusted messengers to kind of give this kind of update is so important. Like, for example, even with sickle cell, now they're saying that there's a stem cell process that can cure sickle cell, but there's a whole lot that goes with that and understanding. And even with prostate cancer, I think not everybody knows that there's robotics now, that the doctor's not even in the room while they're doing the treatment. It's phenomenal. And let me just say this, Bishop, you're a very modest man, and we're really glad to have you leading the troops here for part of this endeavor. And you're with the Conference of National Black Churches, which is no small insignificance. Can you just tell us about that organization? You don't have to tell us how you got picked for this, but we know it's because of your brilliance and your notoriety. But just tell us a little about the organization.
The Conference of National Black Churches was established so that the leaders and the leadership of the historic Black denominations would come together, meet, discuss common problems and common solutions. Now, it has expanded from the original 7 predominant denominations, very similar to what has happened when we say Divine Nine. We think about those 9 sororities, fraternities, but now you have so many other social Greek organizations. So it has expanded in such a way that you've brought in a whole new grouping of people who are interested in finding solutions to these problems. We no longer, and especially now, if you've been keeping up with the news for the past 5 days, you can see why this is so critically important. And when certain beneficial actions have been taken off the table for the people who are, as you say, marginalized, but most in need of having these services before they're in stage 4, before they have complications. And our being out front to encourage people during a time when there's not a crisis on the table is so critically important. And so Conference of National Black Churches, which has brought together all of the predominant denominations in the Black community beyond the initial 7, to all of those denominations that have shown that they have a significant populace, and we meet annually, semi-annually, in order to disseminate information, bringing in surgeon generals and others to speak to the leadership, and then to have the fellowship engage with those experts that come in and share with them. So it has been a very useful and necessary, I guess, aggregation of the leadership within the African-American community of this nation.
Tisha, could you tell us how, or talk to us about how EQB Med defines success in terms of advancing health equity?
Yeah, it's you know, I think one of the critical pieces of what EQB Med is focused on is ensuring that these sites who have really just been less engaged in clinical research overall have the tools and partnerships to become, in their own right, successful clinical trial centers. And so EQB Med is very focused on how can we make sure that this isn't a one and done. I think that that's one of the biggest criticisms with the way that partnerships are often formed is, you know, there's a need and someone goes out and they establish a partnership. Either the need is over, the grant is over, the trial is over, and then the partnership is dissolved, leaving that community or that site now back in some cases, a worse state than they were pre-partnership, because they could have expanded staff, expanded, you know, activities, depending on or hoping for something to continue. And so the goal with EQB Med is to make sure that we're out of this one and done cycle, that we're setting up a sustainable infrastructure through ongoing deliberate partnerships that are meant to help us expand our activity, that those sites, that they have the training necessary, that they have the resources necessary, that they can continue to participate in clinical trials. And also it becomes financially sustainable for them to continue, and financially sustainable for them also to continue all of the partnerships, that you have the funding to make sure that your community partners can also stay engaged with you in this activity. And so that's really at the heart of what we're trying to do with EQB Med. And so the way that we're thinking about, you know, the learning phase, which we're coming to a close now, success for us there was really focused on what are the learnings that we need to take this forward. And so we know from the partnership that we have had, you know, with all of you and the work that we've done at Yale over almost 16 years now, that this sustained partnership enables you to act quickly, enables you to not have to reinvent the wheel every time you want to go a different therapeutic direction. We've talked about, you know, prostate cancer here. We've talked about sickle cell disease. You know, we in the past, we've talked about cardiology and cardiac disease, heart disease, high blood pressure, you name it, cancer. So having these standing partnerships enables us to quickly think about and consider and move in directions that are relevant to the communities that we're in. And so that's really what we're trying to do with EQB Med, making sure that those activities exist, and we're baking in to this formula. Not only do you have, all of these operational capabilities, but that you understand the importance of this, trusted messenger model to extend those partnerships. And I think it's really important, even though, and you're right, Bishop is so modest. One of the facts that I find so incredible is that the Conference of National Black Churches represents 80% of the U.S. Black Christians. That's an incredible and staggering number. But, even beyond just sort of the numbers of it, one of the other things that I think is just so incredible, and that I've learned over the years of partnering with you, you think about the church as having a specific reach, and it's massive. I think it's Reverend Morrison that says sometimes you can speak to thousands of people every Sunday. And that in itself is huge. But a lot of people say, well, not everyone goes to church. But what happens in, marginalized communities and rural communities and urban community centers, individuals might not go to church, but they know that as clergy, you really have their best interests at heart. And that if you trust something, then it at least makes them open to a conversation. And I think at its heart, that's really what we've been trying to do with all of these partnerships and the conversations, is make sure we're focused on that. And that's what we've been doing in the learning phase. As we go forward, we want to tackle some of the bigger issues that we know are still standing in the way of access and sustainability, like workforce. That's been something that's critical. We've started to focus on the youth, but they're probably generations away from us, being able to make an impact. Our kids are great in the exposures program, but how can we make sure that sites have, the staff that they need to sustain clinical trials, to sustain the research partnerships that they've developed with the community, and that they're trained and that they're knowledgeable in how to carry those conversations and how to have those partnerships and hold those partnerships tight. So those are some of the things that we're focused on in the next phase. And we're really excited to start thinking about some of those aspects too, because that also brings economic security to those communities, to those individuals, to those families. So even beyond thinking about just the clinical trials aspect, what are those other benefits that this partnership is bringing? And so we've been excited to start thinking about how those are going to move in the next phase as well.
Tisha,
Go ahead, Reverend.
you spoke about the workforce, and with DEI moving in a strange direction. Do you have a thought about that?
Yeah. I think what's most important is that as we think about workforce and workforce development, I said in the beginning, we're much more alike than we are different. And I think that that's really the key to moving forward. One of the things that I think really excites me about our exposures program is those kids are from all over the US, all over the world. Some are from very rural areas in Utah. And, some have been from Georgia or Charlotte, where they're in a little bit more of an urban area, or Maryland. And when they come together, their ideas are just sparks of innovation. Everything that they come up with, I would love to just be able to implement all of it, because it's so good. And I think that what makes it very special is they're coming together and they're not thinking about this as, an individual from a certain race or a certain background or a certain geography. They're thinking about the global problem that we need to solve, which is we need to make sure that we're bringing discovery to health impact faster. And I think if we all stay focused, that's the prize, because cancer does not discriminate. Heart disease does not discriminate. There's a disproportionate burden of disease, but when you look at the numbers, we all are afflicted and impacted by diseases and chronic conditions that make life unbearable. Everyone, I'm sure, has a relative that's had cancer. Everyone's had a relative with heart disease. And so if we stay focused on what are those problems that we're trying to solve and how life is going to be better for all of us, and everyone wants their child to have a job that can sustain them and their family. Everyone wants them to have the successful career. If we stay focused on those as like that North Star, if you will, I think that, forget about all of these other these other sort of entrapments that are just intended to divide the conversation, especially in these days. I think staying true to those ultimate goals is what's going to get us through and keep us focused on how we make life better. And that's really, where I think I've spent my entire career in that space. And the idea of partnerships is so important to that because it matters who you partner with. I joke all the time about being a Southern girl. I think one of the ways that we should talk to farmers is we should do it through 4-H. I got my 50 chickens through 4-H. And I don't know, many farmers that don't know the extension service or, and so who the trusted messenger is that's able to meet that person where they are, to meet that community where they are. We should just be focused broadly on how we do drive those partnerships, regardless of race or ethnicity or sex or any other thing. Who are the individuals and partners who community will trust, who can drive and make this difference in health impact? And so I know that's a long-winded answer, but that's truly what I believe is the right thing for us to do.
Listen, I'm going to open this up to everybody. I just have one question or a statement. Before I do that, I have to just mention that we're at WNHH 103.5, New Haven Community Radio, and you're working with these cultural ambassadors, AME Zion cultural ambassadors, Yale cultural ambassadors, community leaders, faith leaders. I just want to put that out, but I also want people to know, Tisha, that you are the most brilliant um, most brilliant person I know in dealing with this whole idea of equity within healthcare. During COVID, you were able to bring the healthcare community into the community. That's phenomenal. You were able to take young ambassadors and train them to work in the community. You were able to change the number of people in clinical trials from 3% with our help to 20, 30, and 60 and 80 and some. And so I think that when Pharma was looking for somebody to take the lead, they could not have found a better person than you. And we all applaud you for your work. And we know that as long as you're at the top of this, we're ready to keep up working with you to make sure that we can do the best we can to change health outcomes for all of us in particular, or in general, and the minority in particular. Now, gentlemen, anybody has comments? We're getting ready to run out of time in a little bit. So please, the mic is yours.
Well, I'll just piggyback on what you just said, and that is my involvement it was easy to bring me in because of the persons who are around this screen, but also when I heard that Tisha was the niece of a good friend of mine and a great clergyman, Tim Howard. So I said, oh, okay. And was Tim supporting this? And it really becomes a person-to-person credibility issue. When you see faces that you know and voices that you trust, then you say, okay, well, let me give it a shot. And it's because of that. And you come from a great lineage, Tisha, that has brought many of us in. And no, everybody doesn't go to church, but everybody has family members that go to church. So at picnics and reunions, at funerals and weddings, you have those contacts again that are fortified. And so I think this time, together with our wonderful radio host, Reverend Perry, we are brought in again to a family setting that gives us energy to go back out and to do more of the evangelizing of our community for services that they may not have taken advantage of. So we thank you for that.
No, and I just want to say thank you to all of you because, you give me the credit, but these are really, so many of these ideas have come from you. I've learned so much from all of you in the space. And I think that that's one of the critical parts about thinking about our clinical trials activity is it's easy to sort of stay. I think, Bishop, you might have said the ivory tower. It's easy to stay there in that space and think about, what's the easy path? What's the easy thing to do? But you often push us to think about ways to make research more accessible, taking it to the church. Reverend Perry, Reverend Clayton, Reverend Morrison, you all hosted events to help, with vaccinations, to help with health fairs and bringing information out to individuals. And so it's really fantastic, and all of the work that all of you are doing to drive these points home for communities to make sure that there are opportunities to have those conversations. And you're right, Bishop. It's so great. It's sort of like this family affair where we're all together and we're all having these conversations, but then we're taking that out in that implementation phase and having those broad conversations, having opportunities like this show. And thank you so much for hosting this to even expand the message further. So it's been phenomenal. And I think we just have so much more that we are going to be able to do together.
I would just like to lift up the connection with the AME Zion Church, particularly, but just with the church in general. And I'm grateful for the partnership that we have with EQB Med and the cultural ambassadors and the work that we've been able to do. Its connection to the church, and even with the dissemination of information and educating our communities. There is no greater place than for this to start than in the church. Literally, our schools were started out of the church. You start talking about the South, you get all of these Rosenwald schools at many of our areas. Our churches had their own schools. Tuskegee, where Bishop was talking about, started in the AME Zion Church. All of this started from the church, and there still is no greater place than to have this conversation and to start this work than where our community comes together, and that's right in the church.
Yeah, if I could just piggyback for a moment on that as well, I think one of the other exciting opportunities that we've had together as part of EQB Med are the sponsor conversations, because it's been fantastic that we're having this conversation and we are like-minded in this focus of bringing clinical trials closer to community. But just thinking about our last visit together in Charlotte, we had representatives from Amgen, from Biogen, from Pharma at the table with us. And I can't tell you how many times already we've heard from those individuals about how much they feel like they learn by having those open conversations with you in the community. We had Adrelia Allen from Merck join us in Florence and saying the same thing, this idea that really the pharmaceutical companies that are responsible for bringing these drugs and devices to fruition, having them be able to have these direct conversations and learn from all of you the same things that we've been focused on with partnerships and in a smaller way with those direct faculty members over the years as cultural ambassadors. Now we're capable of expanding that to all of their focus. Some of them even saying that they think some of the lessons here have global reach and the ability to really move these lessons much broader. So that's also been a phenomenal part of EQB Med, is being able to bring the sponsors of the clinical research a little closer to what we're doing as well, and to see the value of these community partnerships and the partnerships more specifically with the church has been fantastic.
Wow. Tisha, where can our listeners go to find out more information about, the CNBC or EQB Med?
EQBmed.org is our website, and we have information there about our sites, about what we're trying to do as an organization. You can see some of the press releases and news information. You can follow us from there on all of the social media platforms, as well as LinkedIn as a professional platform. So you can get the links there, and then as new news is happening with EQB Med, you can get it firsthand, or you can get one of the wonderful videos that you have helped us to create to message more specifically about research. It's just been fantastic. But eqbmed.org is the place to go.
Anybody else? I just wanted to give her the opportunity to shout out to some of her partners down at Morehouse and TSU and Meharry, because there are some phenomenal people who are working with this.
Yeah, it's fantastic. We have, like I mentioned, we have all of our partners, Morehouse School of Medicine, the RCMI Coordinating Center out of Morehouse School of Medicine, Marcella Nunez Smith at Yale, Peter Emby at Vanderbilt, and our sites. We are lucky enough to have Meharry, TSU, I mentioned MUSC, Florence, Grady in Atlanta, the Community Action in Texas, Parkland in Texas, our safety net hospitals, Health Research DX is our decentralized site, Southside Medical Clinic. And we've just finished talking about the Cancer Center at Atrium. So it's just been phenomenal to have all of these sites partnered and engaged in this journey with us.
That's amazing. Absolutely amazing.
Doc, let me just say a word here before y'all flashes off. This has been a magnificent sharing this morning. And what I'm going to take away from today is a couple of things that I think our listeners would love to grab hold of. We must come out of our churches and continue to do the work. And those of us connected to the hospital must come out of those ivory towers and stay focused on the work instead of the problem.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. We want to thank you again, Tisha. It's amazing. And, it does not yet appear, but we got great hopes that, this will take off and the template will be used not only in America, but across the world, and that we can be able to help those who have been marginalized because of the disparities that exist there for people who don't have primary care, who don't have access to get to locations where they can get the care, where the science has not been, the science awareness has not been, released in that particular community. And we thank these pastors who were trailblazers and who are doing such a great job. And hopefully we can increase this number and bring about greater productivity. Again, we want to thank you, and we thank WNHH 103.5 for airing this for those who want to take a step up in learning about what's out there and where we might be able to go from here. Martin Luther King Jr. Hello. All right.
Thank you.
All right.